Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Life Unpotted. Very excited to hear this week. We have a little bit of a different episode for you this week. We recorded outside in the desert. So we talk about that a little bit, but mostly today's conversation is around our thoughts in real time of why is it so hard to get out of our own heads, even when everything that we could possibly want, we have. So in that case, we're here in a national park that's absolutely beautiful. For you, that could be, why am I so in my head at my best friend's birthday party? Or why am I so in my head after I get a promotion? All of these things really just comes back to the fact that we can never avoid our internal environment. So we discuss how is it that we can work through that and really be in the present moment to enjoy these things that we work so hard for to enjoy. So stay tuned to find out what our resolution is. And as always, if you enjoy this podcast, please leave a review below and follow us on Instagram at Life Unpotted, and enjoy the episode, everyone.
We are sitting in Joshua Tree National Park, well, outside of Joshua Tree National Park at an Airbnb. We're recording this episode outside. The sun's about to go down and we have our podcast set up outside, and it's really awesome, honestly, to be recording out here. So I'm excited for today's episode. How about you, Daisy?
I'm very excited, and we're in a good place because I think a windstorm is happening tomorrow. So it's rare that there's not any wind that allows us to be outside and recording this.
Apologize in advance if you guys hear any wind, but we want to bring this to you in real time as we're experiencing the thoughts we're going through. So I think it's interesting that we're right now, we're at an Airbnb, we're in Joshua Tree, and we got here this morning, and I just didn't really feel that great. And I think I went through this internal dialogue in my head where I was kind of saying you're at this really nice national park for the weekend, you're in California, you're visiting somewhere. You can't get in your head. You can't get caught up in your head and ruin this experience. But I really noticed that even though as I was sitting there on this mountain that we had just hiked with a gorgeous view overlooking this gorgeous view of I don't even know what it was overlooking, mountains and mountains and mountains, I still felt like I was in my head. I still felt like I couldn't enjoy the moment. And in that moment, it clicked for me. Is it really the environment? Can I be sitting in the most gorgeous place on earth but still not feel content and still feel like it's not good enough and still feel like I'm not happy? And I was kind of getting pissed off at myself because I'm just kind of why are you not enjoying this, Sophie? What else do you want? And I think that's kind of what I talk about today is the whole idea of we can go to these places, we can go on these vacations, we can go on these trips thinking that they're going to make us feel better. And a lot of time, I think they do. They enable us to have space to get outside our heads. But when you find yourself somewhere where you're not working, you're kind of on a vacation, but you're still stuck in your head, it makes me ask, how much does our environment really play a role in the way that we experience reality? So that's kind of just what I've been going through. And honestly, I was feeling frustrated about it. So I think it'd be a good episode to talk about today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is an interesting episode. And I'll add in my own piece of my experience, and then we can jump into the topic a little bit. But yeah, I think whenever you go from being in a city or a town or somewhere that's highly more populated and there's a lot going on, a lot of busyness, a lot of distractions, I think moving from that space into, say, a national park where you don't see anyone else, you're the only one there. It's a transition place from chaos or from stimulation, from distraction, from more some external experience, shifting inward to an internal experience. So say if you're feeling anxious, it's way easy to deflect that if you can go to the coffee shop, you can go talk to people, you can go and there's many other ways to find yourself out of your head. But I think when you go somewhere that's like a national park, it's quieter. You can't really distract yourself. You're with your thoughts. So when we went into the national park, I was finding myself being maybe we can go into the town. Maybe we can go look at the shops. And because ultimately it's hard to be with yourself. But I had an interesting experience where we just did an intro for a podcast we released last week. And I truly didn't feel good until I did that uncomfortable task of making myself get it together, put something out that was legible or something you could hear. And I feel so much better from that experience. So going back to what you were saying, I think is it your environment or is it your internal environment? And Realistically, I think it's both. I think that you're not confined to being a certain way with your external environment being a certain way. Obviously, being in a beautiful place, it makes things a lot easier. You have more space to get to these realizations, but it's not one without the other. Or maybe it is, but you can't ever ignore the internal environment.
Yeah, and I guess it just kind of makes me think of like, no matter where you go, your mind follows you. It's so easy to think that if we go somewhere, if we leave our state, if we leave our town, if we leave our city, we're automatically going to feel better. And this experience, being in Joshua Tree, being in California, having amazing weather, having all external factors be checked off, beautiful weather, great day, I'm not working, I whatever, but I still don't feel good. So it just shows that like we can't run away from how we're feeling by moving to a new city, by completely quitting the job we're at, by doing something. I think I just saw a lizard or something go down. Okay, so I'll keep an eye on that just to make sure that that's not coming near us. But it's so, I forgot what I was saying, but it's so easy, I think. I think this matters because it shows that we can't run away from how we're feeling just by finding ourselves in a new situation. And I think it just shows that we have to confront how we're feeling. And for me, what I was confronting in this situation was recognizing that a lot of times I don't feel like the situation I'm in is good enough. I don't feel like I'm happy. I don't feel like I appreciate it. And I go back and forth with this really crazy dichotomy being like, holy shit, like this is so beautiful. Like this is earth. Like being around nature, this is like the most beautiful thing you could be around. To also being like, I kind of want to go home and go on my phone.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. Like, I think maybe because we're so used to being on our phone so much. We're so used to, like, getting so much dopamine from the phone that when you kind of leave that and you put your phone down and you go out and you embark into nature, it can kind of be uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly. I was thinking it can be uncomfortable to have no distractions, and it can almost be anxiety ridden if you're looking at it through a lens of not accepting it.
Yeah.
Being dropped into the middle of nowhere where it's just rocks, it can feel weird and uncomfortable.
It could be, I literally had the thought, I'm like, these rocks are kind of ugly. And then on the other hand, I'm like, these are billions of years old, like going back to years and years and years of history. And I think the rocks are ugly.
Well, it depends, I guess, on how you're looking at it. It's like
is that ridiculous?
Yeah, it is, because it's well, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So it's depending on what you want to see, what you're gonna allow yourself to see. And I think that's actually a good example. I didn't know where you're going with that. I kind of judged you, but I think that's a good example, because going back to like your environment, you're only gonna see what you allow yourself to see, and your internal environment is what sets that tone. So you can be somewhere that you're excited to be, and then ultimately you're not going to allow yourself to see that because your internal environment isn't allowing you to accept and let go of something, and you might not even know what that is. And I think the best thing to do is to do something that gets you engaged. I think that's something about like vacations or going and traveling that can feel confusing, is that you don't have to do anything. And I think without having that push to like get engaged into something, you can really spiral.
This makes me think a lot about vacations, because I've been thinking about this in the past of like, okay, what does a vacation really mean? And do vacations always allow us to connect with ourselves in the way that we need to? We went to this retreat a few months back in November, where it was nothing like I've been on before, in the sense that we were, in Vancouver Island in Canada, weren't really on our phones that much. We're in this cabin, and I feel like I connected myself more in that retreat than I ever had in any vacation I ever went on with my family growing up. And I think back to a lot of vacations I went with my family, and I remember just kind of feeling like miserable a lot of the time, of just like, not miserable, but just like in my head, uncomfortable. It's almost like when you're doing something that you should be enjoying, you have this like discontent feeling of just feeling like this isn't good enough. So the reason I bring up the retreat that we went on is that when we first got to the retreat, I kind of felt like so uncomfortable there. I kind of felt like I didn't like it at all. But then finally, like as the week progressed, and we were doing a lot of like mindfulness work over there, and like journaling, writing down our thoughts, writing down our emotions. and talking with each other about our feelings, as we finally connected, I realized that I was just like really anxious. But the parallel and the comparison of like the retreat versus a vacation is when you're going on a vacation, there's a lot of things that you're kind of numbing yourself with, a lot of things you're distracting yourself with. So you don't really realize that the reason I'm not really enjoying this is because I'm kind of anxious. Does that make sense?
It does make sense because generally when you go on vacation, you think dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. I want to have fun. Or I feel like that's the picture that's painted, whether it's like Carnival Cruise Lines, like let's have so much fun, like let's have so much stimulation, like let's have unlimited drinks and unlimited food. And I feel like the quintessential vacation is marketed as have the best week of your life. And I think the best week of your life entails having so much fun, and that's not necessarily reconnecting with yourself, being mindful. So I think, and I don't really pay attention to vacation marketing, but maybe it is starting to change with maybe like Airbnbs, where it's like go and rest up and be a place where you can just be with yourself. You don't have to be around other people. Maybe it's changing, but I think in the traditional sense of like going on a vacation, like you're going in to have a lot of fun. And I think what you were mentioning about the retreat was the first kind of vacation you went on that was restorative and reflective, and you found that had way more meaning, that brought way more purpose, I would say, into your life. This type of vacation gave you what you actually wanted. And I think the reason why that is because you're not jumping from your life to sipping cocktails and eating endless amounts of food. And nothing's wrong with that, but I think it's just like a different type of vacation that goes from like one stimuli to the next. And when that's the case, you don't have a moment to think about what's going on with my life. Am I happy? And when you're dropped into wilderness, you have no choice other than to do that. And you can either dwell on your thoughts or you can move past them and really start to just be.
And I think it also makes me think about like when you're on vacation a lot of the time, you might not think that you're not happy because you're doing all the things that normally make you happy. Like you said, like you're getting drinks, you're meeting up with friends. And it's not until, like we said, we're in nature with no one that we're able to feel that uncomfortability, that anxiety that comes up. And I think that anxiety is always with us, but we suppress it. We run away from it. And I think what this comes back to and what the point we're trying to draw here is like, sometimes we don't really know what's best for ourselves. Sometimes we so naturally always want to go to things that feel good. We want to, go to consume things that feel good, be around people that we think are making us feel good, do activities that are making us feel good. But it's not until that we're in silence, that we are not distracting ourselves, that we really are faced to look at that discomfort and kind of see that, wait, maybe I'm someone who doesn't really know how to appreciate things. Maybe I'm someone who can have be in the most beautiful scenery and still feel this uncomfortable feeling. And I think that is what we should talk about. It's like, how do you recognize that? How do you move from that? And how do you allow yourselves to experience life? Like, how do you allow yourself to enjoy life and not get so caught up in this mind, in this narrative of this feelings that you're not even might be aware of?
Yeah, so I have some thoughts on this. I think that you might not even realize you're resisting things, but like if you're in that kind of mindset, I think you are resisting things. If you're on vacation and you're just like not happy, it's like, ugh, like I don't want to go and do that. I don't want to go and do that. Change your mindset of being like, I'm going to do this. Like, let's go do this. Like challenging yourself to like get engaged with it. And before you know it, like you're engaged in it and you're not worrying about how you feel and you're actually experiencing your vacation in simple form.
Yeah.
Like I think it's that simple, but I think it can also be like that is so complicated to get to that. I think it always comes back to awareness. Why is it so complicated? Because the brain is naturally so complicated and it like tangles up all of your thoughts and makes it all so confusing. And that's why I think getting out and doing physical things is so helpful. Like we saw a TikTok, and I'm on like ice bath TikTok, where seeing people do something uncomfortable first thing in the morning, where they get into an ice bath where it's like 4 degrees outside and it's in freezing water, that kind of shocks you into what you have to do. It wakes you up. And ever since I saw that, I've been thinking about, well, how can I implement things like that when I feel like my mind is wandering throughout the day?
So it feels like sometimes like the only way to get out of our heads is to become aware that we're in our heads. But that is the whole issue here, is that a lot of times we're not aware of it. And for me, as we're sitting on that mountain today, I think that is when I moved out of my head and said, everything is perfect right now. Everything's so beautiful right now. Like, if I can't be happy here, I can't be happy anywhere. And it kind of puts your whole life into perspective in those moments. And you kind of have to do some reflection and be honest with yourself of like looking at yourself and saying, in this environment, if I'm not happy, will I ever be happy? Will I ever be able to enjoy things?
Well, I think it's complicated because I don't think there's a perfect equation for everyone. I think it's really personal. And maybe I'm wrong. You can tell me if I'm wrong. But, like, I didn't have the experience that you had, like, when we were sitting on the mountain. Like, I was like, oh, like, can we go into a town? Like, can we go do something? So I didn't have that experience. For me personally, it was forcing myself to do something I thought I couldn't do. And not...
Like sitting through it.
Yeah, which in short was like recording a succinct intro to our other podcast. So it's like something as simple as that. Like that's what helps personally. What helps me the most is confronting things that I don't think that historically I could do in the past.
Right.
Or I wasn't strong enough to do in the past, or I wasn't smart enough to do in the past. It's like just doing it and moving on.
Doing something uncomfortable, I guess.
Yeah, and I think doing something uncomfortable can mean a lot of different things to different people, right? That might not be uncomfortable to a talk show host, right?
Right.
Or it's giving, and it's warming up. It's giving yourself it's not judging yourself from the very first thing that you do. But that is just like my specific example of like what gets me into the groove and gets me engaged in a moment and out of my head. Like, what is something that you find like, what is something that is uncomfortable that you feel like you can't do, that when you go and do it, you feel empowered afterward?
I think I was just kind of like looking at myself. I was kind of judging myself, and I was kind of just like, what do you really want? Like, why is this not good enough for you? Then, like, what is going to be good enough for you?
So questioning your thoughts.
Questioning my thoughts. And honestly, like, sometimes it's like, I'm always saying self-compassion. But I think in that moment, I was kind of like, you know what? Get the fuck out of your head. Like, stop.
So giving yourself some, like, tough love.
Giving yourself some tough love and saying, like, get out of your head. Enjoy this. Like, I'm reminding myself I'll never have this experience again. This is the last time that we'll be sitting here out in Joshua Tree on this day in our life, at this point of our life, ever again. We'll never have this experience again. And it's like, why is it so hard to understand in these moments as we go through life that we're never going to have this experience again? Why is that so hard to understand? I almost think like our brains can't comprehend it, because if we start to comprehend it, it's a little fucking scary. That like, oh, that means my death is in whenever that's happening. I think like it always comes back to death. Like it always does. Of like, because we avoid understanding our mortality, it makes it so difficult to enjoy the moment. Like if I was diagnosed with a terminal illness sitting on that mountain, I would have so much more insight into my life to let go, to be like, oh my God, I'm not going to have a chance to do this again. But that is because I assume I'm going to live till 80. I assume I'll have the rest of my life. It's the assumptions that we make about our lives that we almost have all this time that prevents us from living a good life.
And I also want to say that, like, when I hear you say that, I feel pressure. It's like, oh, you have to enjoy this moment or else you're not going to get it back. And I don't think that's really the tone that it should be delivered in. I'm not like saying you're delivering it that. I'm saying that's how I'm receiving it.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to remind yourself of like,
you don't want to use death as a fear.
No.
Mortality.
And that always comes, I always perceive it as fear, kind of, when you say it like that.
I know. I was wondering, is that kind of like fear-based?
It feels a little intense, like a little heavy. And like I get it, like sometimes like you need something sobering.
I guess I get like mad at myself though, because I'm just kind of like.
So yeah, this is directed at yourself.
Directed at me.
But this is what you do to get yourself out of your head.
Sometimes.
But
I think sometimes that doesn't work, because then it can send you down an anxious spiral.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Like that's why this is not so simple. It's complicated.
Yeah.
And every moment is different. So I think that's where I think questioning your thoughts is always good, but that might not always be what gets you out of your head and into the moment. I just have to say, like, as we are almost always discussing on this podcast things that help us get out of our head and live mindfully and be more attached or be more aligned with ourselves, I wonder, is it just us? Are we the only ones that struggle to constantly feel like we know who we are and to move through the world really aligned with who we are and doing something that is aligned to us?
I think that's a universal experience as being a human.
Because I think that is our goal. being able to live aligned and being able to be in that alignment more often than not. So I think that's really what we are discussing at this point, is like following into the alignment that allows us to really be engaged with our life and continue to build a life that is aligned to us.
I just think it's so interesting because I'm like judging myself as we're recording this right now.
Why?
Because I feel like I feel like I'm like not making sense. So this is like, let's keep this in here. I think this is like an interesting thing that comes up while recording podcasts, where it's like, I'm kind of like, am I making sense? But it's like, this is my real experience. So it's not about, it's so easy to want to like, oh, let's edit this out because people might not resonate with this. But what if people really resonate with it? It's like, and that's the reason I cut something, because I think someone else is not going to want to listen to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm watching a bunny from afar.
Wait, there's a bunny behind us?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Straight back. And it's like, does that bunny ever wonder if it's eating something wrong? Like, does it ever question that it's doing something wrong?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about being around animals and being around nature and just seeing the way they interact with the world is that they don't really think about things the way we do. They're not questioning, like, is this grass good? They're just going to eat it.
Yeah, they don't have the mental capacity to analyze the things we do the way that we do intellectually. So
that's just another point. I think maybe the answer is just to stop thinking. I don't know, because then it's like, I'm always like, let's reflect, self-reflection.
No, but this is something that if you are someone who tends to analyze things, that is dangerous, because you think analyzing, oh, it's fine, but really what it's doing is it is perpetuating thought patterns that you're currently in. So I think sometimes analyzing is just like too much.
Analyzing could be the worst thing you could do.
Yeah, like let it go. And I think you have to challenge yourself to let it go. But I get it.
Okay, so this is helpful now, because it makes me realize when I was sitting on the mountain earlier after our hike, the reason why I wasn't enjoying it, because I think I was thinking too much about it. Sometimes we're like thinking about things too much, and that's why we can't enjoy them.
Well, you're in your head.
So how do you stop thinking?
I think you have to truly be engaged in the moment you're in. You have to be doing something that requires focus.
You have to focus. I think you have to focus.
To at least get into it, I think.
Yeah.
Like when I was recording that intro, I was focused on it because I was like, okay, we got to go record this podcast, or we want to go record it while the sun is setting. So we have some nice lighting and we don't want it to get dark.
Yeah.
So there is a timely manner. I realized to get what I want, a podcast that is recorded with the nice sunset, I can't dwell on the fact that I am so fearful, or that I don't think that I'm capable of recording a succinct intro like I'm going to. I didn't have the time to dwell on that. I was like, I have to do this. I'm going to do it. And then I listened back and I'm like, oh, that's not so bad. Let's try it again. Okay, we're going to do it. I didn't allow the space for myself to dwell because there was a deadline, basically.
When we have too much time to think about something, we don't allow ourselves to enjoy the situation. You have to have a if we, like when you're doing something that forces you to focus, that can allow you to get your outside of your head. It's a fun experience to like just be outside talking.
I know, it's really nice. It's really nice. Well, that's why I think it comes back to that uncomfortable task, which was what I challenged the readers in the blog post that we posted earlier today, was to do one thing today that is uncomfortable or that scares you. And I think that is so powerful, because we may not know what this big thing is that we're afraid of, but if we start doing these little uncomfortable tasks, we're going to understand, number one, what our fears are, so we can face them. But back to what applies to this topic is that it's going to allow us to get immersed in what this reality actually is, versus just living in our head.
So just getting immersed, being engaged with what you're actually doing without thinking about doing it.
Looping it back to what we initially were talking about was like when you're on a vacation, or you're on a trip, or when you're doing something in an environment that's outside of yourself, and you're wondering, well, why isn't this external environment helping me get out of my head alone? Why isn't this one experience that I'm paying to go on and experience, why is it not fixing everything?
Yeah.
The reality is that you have to work in tandem with your internal environment, no matter what your external environment is. And I think that's also important to say, like, you can do this in your own apartment too. Like, you don't have to be on a vacation, but I think that it's more so the question that we're answering is, why do I go on vacation, or why do I go on a trip, and why am I not enjoying it to the fullest and getting the most out of it? And it's because, are you checking in with your internal environment?
Right. Is something deeply hurting you or something upsetting you that you haven't confronted? Because I don't know if you're going to be able to really enjoy that vacation if you are still working through something that you haven't looked at or confronted.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to a lot of times, like, there's things that are so deep within us that we haven't really faced or confronted. And those are going to follow us. That you can almost like forget that like there's something you have to work through.
And I think it's possible that this is really common because if we're working most days out of the year and we go on like these like trips or these vacations, we have a break from our day-to-day life, that's when like I think it's just more likely for it to be reflective because you're not filling your days with things you have to do, like you're taking a break. So it's likely that your life might flash before your eyes or you might start thinking about your life because you're not doing the day-to-day thing. So you can either choose to dive in and understand what's going on if you're like not feeling fully content, or you're just not going to enjoy your vacation. You're going to continue to not look at these parts that you don't look at on a daily basis.
And also not thinking
because you have more time on a vacation. Like you have more time, like you have your full day to yourself. Whereas when you're working 8+ hours are dedicated, your emotional state is dedicated to whoever you're working for. So I think when you're on a vacation, like it's new, like you have access to your emotional self 24 hours of the day. So I think that is an interesting, quick transition from your day-to-day life.
And I think a lot of us don't know how to really we don't really have a relationship with that part of us to be able to access it because we're not used to doing that. Like you said, we're always working. We're always so busy that when you do have this free space and time, it's hard to find the means, or it's hard to figure out like what's the first step in connecting with myself.
Right. What is that first step? And I think like truly I don't know, it depends on where you're at. It truly depends on where you're at, I think. But I think everyone can access that like childlike state of like awe and enjoyment, and I think that just is like truly being immersed and engaged. I've said this the entire podcast episode.
So I think,
but I think it's the truth. Like I think of like what I do as a kid. Like on vacation, it's like okay, let's go on a zip line where like you're so immersed in this experience that it's like shocking.
Okay, so
or you're on a roller coaster.
Okay, question. I have a question. So like if you're just like laying on a rock or you're camping, like you're in the middle of a forest, you're in the middle of whatever, what does it look like to be engaged? Like I think we're so often looking like engagement means doing a physical task, doing something on your phone, doing something like you said for you is recording the podcast intro. But what if you don't, how do we let go if we don't have something to engage in? Does engaging mean like just being there? Because we don't always have something to engage in.
Right.
It's just being present. But what if like I think for the point of like what if you're just in nature, you're just hiking. Well, hiking, you're moving your legs, you're doing something. But what if you're sitting still?
Good question.
I think it's maybe not judging your emotions, not judging the experience that you're having, not judging that you feel uncomfortable, not judging that you might feel comfortable while being in the vacation, not getting mad at yourself for feeling the feelings that you're feeling. So I want to go back to what I was saying earlier. Honestly, I don't know if being hard on yourself was the answer. I think maybe self-compassion of like, look, I understand that it's hard for you to get out of your head. And I see that and I understand that, and that's okay. Because once you say that that's okay, I think you let go.
I think it's that simple. But I think like a step to getting there is that if you just accept and let go of your expectations. I think expectations are a big one.
I think the answer to the question I posed at the beginning of this podcast is kind of just simply you just say, okay, this is how I'm feeling. Let's move forward.
Yeah.
Instead of questioning and trying to understand it. This just made me realize that I still question shit so much. It's to the point where it's about my detriment. Why couldn't I just say, okay? Like,
it's such a good point.
It's the judgment of the experiences that we're having instead of just being present in the experience without having to label it or understand it, just having the experience.
And this is just, this experience is the experience. And what
this is my life right now.
Like, and I think this is like I've been sick, and I think it's like like bringing this example in of like I'm sick. I can either lean one way and like really like make my entire personality right now about being sick and make it worse, or I can just say I'm sick. I don't feel great, and whatever. Like I'm still in a safe place. I'm getting the food that I need. Like I'm like healthy. overall, I think it's just like accepting that like this is just how it is. And I think that is like part of like that's a big part of it, of like letting go of that expectation.
I thought about that recently too, because I wasn't feeling too great, and it was like, I can either make my whole identity, my whole personality about the fact that I don't feel good right now, or I can just say, that's just something that's happening. Let's move on.
Yeah.
And then I forget. It's almost like when you start to accept how you're feeling, you start to almost forget that you're even feeling that way. And that's kind of the crazy part of it all.
Yeah. Yep.
So does it just go back to acceptance?
I think like if you don't feel good, like there's gonna be times where you feel worse and then other times where you feel kind of better. But if you cling to that idea that you're so sick, you're gonna feel like shit all the time.
For our listeners, like just to clarify, we don't really know what we're talking about. We're just trying to figure this shit out for ourselves. So like we're trying to work it out. We're trying to figure out, why do we feel miserable when we're sitting in beautiful Joshua Tree? But I think I feel a little bit better now after realizing that the whole problem was the fact that I was thinking too much about it. It's that simple, but we complicate it so much.
Well, okay, so back when Twitter was a big thing, it is still a big thing, but it was more of a big thing for me when I was in high school, and I used to go on there to look for, this is like kind of like before Instagram was what it was and how you could find all the images. There were like cool motivational images on Twitter, and there was this one that stuck with me where a person's on a bus and there's windows on either side of the bus, and it was like, today is what you make it. And it was like one side of the bus, it was like clouds and ugly, and one side of the bus windows were like beautiful mountains, and it's like life is what you decide to see today.
Like, is the glass half empty? Is the glass half empty or is it half full?
And it comes down to is like we overcomplicate it.
Right. Like, are you going to enjoy this moment or are you not?
Yeah, it's that simple.
Kind of really that simple.
Yeah.
But enjoying it doesn't mean that you have to feel so good. Enjoying it means I'm just going to accept the moment.
Exactly.
You don't have to feel good to enjoy the moment.
I think that answers the question.
So if you're moving somewhere, if you're going somewhere, if you're traveling somewhere to try to feel better, maybe instead shift that and saying, I'm going to try to accept how I'm feeling. And then from there, I can maybe embrace the situation more. Because being simply in an environment is not, if you're not accepting how you're feeling, being in an environment is not going to be that quick switch for you.
Changing your environment's not going to fix it, but changing your environment is enjoyable. So
yes.
You can't expect it to change how you're feeling. So if you just accept that you're going to feel the same in a new beautiful environment or a new different environment, you're going to actually be able to enjoy the environment for what it is, and you might find yourself getting out of how you actually feel. Well, I think that ties it up.
I think it ties it up.
I do. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for being
If you made it this far through, thanks for listening. Daisy's looking at me like, why are you discounting this episode?
This is a great episode.
It's just... No, it is. Well, let us know if you like it, please. Rate, review, subscribe, follow us on Instagram. You know the drill. We want to hear your feedback because, you know, we always talk about it's easy to get in your head. So we would love to hear from you guys. Like, do you like this podcast? You know, we get X amount of plays and all this stuff, but like, we want to hear from you. Do you like this podcast? What do you think about it? What topics do you want to hear? Do you feel like it's helping you? Do you feel like it's relatable? So let us know. And as always, don't forget, new blog posts every Monday. Make sure you check that out. And I think we're just going to head out. We're going to dinner in Yucca Valley, leaving our Airbnb at Joshua Tree. The sun just set, and we're really just excited to accept however we're feeling and embrace this evening.
Yep.
We hope you guys
move through any feelings that may arise.
Yep. Well, cheers to that.
All right, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Talk to you guys next week.